You'd be surprised how bad of a person you are, thought experiments reveal. We all like to believe we're good people. We help when we can, we try to be fair, we don't intentionally hurt others at least, not in ways that feel unjustified. But what if I told you that you're probably not as good as you think? What if I told you that, given the right circumstances, you might make choices that would shock even yourself? The truth is, we all carry a hidden darkness, a moral blind spot that we refuse to acknowledge. And the only reason we don't see it is because life hasn't forced us to confront it yet. Let's start simple. Imagine you're walking down the street and see a man lying on the sidewalk, unconscious. What do? Most people would like to say, of course I'd help, but studies show otherwise. In real-world situations, most people walk right past. They assume someone else will handle it. They don't want to get involved. They fear making things worse. This is known as the bystander effect, and it reveals something unsettling. When responsibility is shared, we often do nothing. And the scariest part, we don't feel bad about it. We rationalize it. I was in a hurry. I didn't know what to do. There were other people around. We convinced ourselves that inaction was the right move, even when someone else's life was at stake. But let's go deeper. Imagine you're in a situation where doing the right thing comes at a great personal cost. You witness a powerful person commit a crime. Reporting them could ruin your career, your relationships, maybe even your safety. Would you still do the right thing? We all want to believe we would. But history tells a different story. The world is full of injustices that continue not because people are evil, but because good people stay silent. Fear, self-preservation, social pressure, these forces shape our morality more than we like to admit. And when push comes to shove, most of us protect ourselves first.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, let's turn the discomfort up a notch. Imagine you're in a position of power and you're given a choice. By pressing a button, you can save 10 lives, but it will cost the life of one innocent person. Do you press the button? Many people say yes, believing that sacrificing one to save many is the logical choice. But now, let's change the scenario. Instead of pressing a button, you have to physically push someone off a bridge to stop a runaway train from killing 10 people. Suddenly, that choice feels different. Why? The numbers haven't changed, but your role in the act has. This experiment, known as the trolley problem, reveals something disturbing. Our morality is inconsistent. We like to believe we make ethical decisions based on logic, but in reality, our emotions, biases, and personal discomfort dictate our choices far more than we realize. So here's the question: if your morality shifts based on context, based on fear, based on how directly responsible you feel, can you really say you're a good person? Or are you just someone who hasn't been tested yet? Because the truth is, most of us have never been put in situations where our true moral limits are exposed. We judge others for their failures, for their cruelty, for their betrayals, but we do so from the comfort of never having faced their choices ourselves. We assume we would have done better, but would we? Or would we justify our actions the same way they did? And if that's the case, what does that say about us? About the limits of human goodness, about the stories we tell ourselves to avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that maybe we're not as righteous as we think, the lies we tell ourselves, how we justify our own moral failures. If there's one thing humans are exceptionally good at, it's self-deception. We don't just make moral mistakes, we rationalize them. We bend reality in ways that allow us to live with ourselves, to believe we are still good people, even when our actions suggest otherwise. The scariest part? We do this without even realizing it. Our minds are wired to protect our self-image, to shield us from the discomfort of admitting when we fall short. And because of that, we walk through life believing in a version of ourselves that might not actually exist. Think about the last time you did something you knew was wrong. Maybe you lied, maybe you hurt someone, maybe you looked the other way when you should have spoken up. What was your first instinct? Was it to admit fault, to take full responsibility, to accept that you had failed morally? Or was it to justify your behavior? I had no choice. It wasn't that bad. They would have done the same to me. These thoughts come so naturally that we don't even recognize them as defenses. They feel like truth. But they're not. They are narratives we construct to protect ourselves from guilt. And this is where things get dangerous. Because once you justify one small moral failure, it becomes easier to justify the next. And then the next. And soon, the person you thought you were, the person who always does the right thing, starts to erode. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way you even notice. Just slowly, subtly, you start making exceptions. You start allowing yourself to cut corners, to compromise, to prioritize your own comfort over what is right. And yet, through all of this, you still believe you are a good person, because your mind won't let you believe otherwise. This isn't just an individual failing, it's a fundamental part of human nature. It's why corruption spreads in governments, why people in power abuse their positions, why atrocities throughout history were carried out not just by monsters, but by ordinary people who convinced themselves they had no choice. The most horrifying truth about human morality is that evil is rarely committed by people who see themselves as evil. But even the worst actions in history were committed by people who found ways to justify them, people who believed they were doing what was necessary, what was deserved, what was unavoidable. And if they could do that, what makes you think you're immune? What makes you think that, given the right circumstances, you wouldn't do the same? That's the disturbing reality. None of us know our true moral limits until we're tested. We assume we would never betray, never harm, never become the villain. But that assumption is based on a life where we've never had to make those choices. And history shows, time and time again, that when people are put in extreme situations, they justify things they never thought possible. So here's a question that should haunt you. How many of your beliefs about yourself are just comfortable illusions? How much of your morality is real, and how much of it exists only because you've never been forced to confront its limits? Because if your morality only holds up when it's easy, is it even morality at all? Or is it just convenience disguised as virtue? The hidden cost of moral blindness, how small choices shape who you really are. Most of us like to believe that morality is tested in grand moments, life or death decisions, extreme situations, choices that clearly separate good from evil. But the truth is, our morality is shaped in the small, quiet moments, the choices that seem insignificant, the ones we barely notice. Every day, we make decisions that reveal who we truly are, but because these choices don't feel dramatic, we don't pay attention to them. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. Think about the last time you saw something wrong and did nothing. Maybe a coworker was being mistreated, but you stayed silent because you didn't want to get involved. Maybe someone was being humiliated online, but you scrolled past because it wasn't your problem. Maybe you ignored a wrong you could have corrected because it was easier to look away. These seem like small things, but they aren't. Every time you choose comfort over courage, every time you prioritize convenience over principle, you reinforce a pattern, and patterns become character. The terrifying thing about morality isn't that people wake up one day and decide to be evil. It's that people slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly lower their standards. They compromise a little, then a little more. They stop questioning themselves, and before they realize it, they have become the kind of person they once swore they would never be. Not because they made one catastrophic decision, but because they made 1,000 small ones that led them there. And here's the most dangerous part. We rarely notice this process in ourselves. We see it in others when someone we admired turns out to be corrupt, when a friend betrays us, when a leader fails but we don't see the same potential in ourselves. We assume that if we were in their position, we would have done better. But why? What makes you think that, given the same pressures, the same temptations, the same justifications, you wouldn't make the same choices? What makes you believe you are fundamentally different? The truth is, morality isn't just about what you believe, it's about what you practice. And if you don't practice integrity in the small things, you won't suddenly find it in the big things. If you justify lying when it's convenient, if you ignore injustice when it's uncomfortable, if you prioritize yourself at the expense of others when no one is watching, then you are already shaping the kind of person you will become when the stakes are higher. So here's a question you should ask yourself every day. Who are you becoming? Not who do you want to be, not who do you think you are, but who are you actually becoming through your daily choices? Because in the end, your morality isn't defined by your intentions or your beliefs, it's defined by your actions. And if your actions don't align with the person you claim to be, then maybe it's time to stop assuming you're the hero of your own story. The final test: will you choose to see yourself as you truly are? Most people go their entire lives without ever truly confronting themselves. They live inside a comfortable illusion, believing they are good, believing they would do the right thing when it matters, but believing they are different from those who fail morally. But belief is easy. Reality is harder. And the reality is this: if you have never tested your morality in the face of true difficulty, you do not actually know who you are. This is the part most people avoid. The part where you don't just think about morality in the abstract, but where you actually look at yourself, your real self, not the story you tell yourself. It's easy to judge others. It's easy to see corruption, cruelty, and selfishness in the world and feel like you're above it. But what happens when you turn that same scrutiny inward? What happens when you apply the same harshness to yourself that you apply to those you condemn? Are you really as honest as you think? As brave? As selfless? Here's the truth: you have already failed moral tests. We all have. You have stayed silent when you should have spoken up. You have chosen comfort when you should have chosen courage. You have put yourself first in ways that hurt others, even if you didn't mean to. You have made decisions that, if you were on the outside looking in, you would judge someone else for making. And yet, you have excused yourself. You have justified. You have convinced yourself that your circumstances were different, that your reasons were valid, that you are still a good person despite it all. But what if you stopped doing that? What if, for once, you looked at yourself honestly? What if you admitted that you are not as good as you pretend to be? That you have flaws, that you have failed, that you are capable of the same moral weakness you despise in others? Would that realization break you, or would it set you free? Because here's the paradox: true morality doesn't come from believing you are good. It comes from accepting that you are not, and then choosing to do better anyway. The people who are most dangerous are not the ones who know they are flawed, it's the ones who refuse to see it. The ones who hide behind the illusion of their own righteousness. The ones who justify their actions no matter how harmful, because they cannot bear to admit that they, too, are capable of selfishness, cruelty, and failure. But the people who make the world better are the ones who see themselves clearly. The ones who recognize their own capacity for wrongdoing and fight against it every single day. The ones who don't just assume they will make the right choices, but who actively work to become the kind of person who will. So here's the final question, the one that matters more than any other. Will you choose to see yourself as you truly are? Will you choose to stop living inside the comforting lie that you are inherently good, and instead take responsibility for proving it through your actions? Because morality is not a belief, it is a practice. And if you are not practicing it, then you are not who you think you are. The choice is yours. But make no mistake, doing nothing is still a choice. And if you walk away from this unchanged, if you dismiss these questions, if you cling to the belief that you are good without ever testing what that truly means, then maybe you have already failed the test.